You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our podcast series, Let's Talk Sustainable Business. The series is brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. We do live in very volatile times, and this has taken a toll on our guests and ourselves, and now we are finally back after a very extended New Year break. Today, I will be talking to Ken Bowles, Chief Financial Officer at Smurfit Kappa Group. Before we get started, please let me express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine suffering from Putin's war aggression and intolerable atrocities. Our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine, but we will not touch on this issue today. We want to focus on sustainability and circularity. So please let me introduce our guest for today. Ken joined Jefferson Smurfit Group as a treasury accountant in 1994. And after the merger with Kappa Packaging in 2005, Ken held several positions in the finance functions of the group. In 2016, he became Chief Financial Officer. Ken holds an MBA from the University College of Dublin. Welcome, Ken. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and how sustainability has entered your personal and professional life.
Good morning, Uwe, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me about sustainability. It's a topic that here in Smurfit Kappa we're passionate about, and it's interesting. We've been talking about it since 1934, and it seems like the world has woken up in the last 5 years to our way of thinking. I suppose a little bit about me. I'm 50. I just turned 51 a couple of weeks ago in isolation because I had COVID, so not the best birthday I've ever celebrated. But never mind. I'm married. My wife Elaine, we've been together, married for 16 years, together over 20. I have two wonderful sons, and Jack and Adam, 15 and 14, and they're everything teenage boys should be. Wonderful most of the time, and an absolute pain some of the time. I think that's their job. And I've been with the what was the Jefferson Smurfit Group and Smurfit Kappa for 28 years. So clearly, a large proportion of my life has been spent in the group rather than outside it. And I suppose that's sort of where sustainability, kind of interacts with the personal, because I'm a consumer, like you're a consumer, like we're all consumers. So at a very personal level, every time we go into a supermarket, we make a choice. Every time we do something in our lives, it's a choice around how we do that: drive, walk, run, cycle, take that plane to a meeting that's very short, buy that plastic bottle rather than kind of refillable. They're all simple choices that the consumer make. And I suppose, what I try and do is kind of connect that back to the kind of bigger, broader picture about where we sit as an organization in that kind of conversation, which is, it's our products that are sitting on shelves. It's our products that are, designed to make the world a better place from a kind of recyclability perspective and hopefully from a climate perspective because of the intensity of how we produce those. But I suppose you can't be in Smurfit Kappa, and you wouldn't be here this long if sustainability wasn't something you were A, passionate about, and B, kind of drove your everyday decision making, as irrespective of the roles I've had over the years, they've always been impacted by sustainability. I actually remember back in 1995, would you believe, writing a paper at that point for the management team on sustainability accounting, which had become something of that was going to be here quite soon. That was 1995, and I'm fairly certain it wasn't the best piece of work I ever did as a kind of 24-year-old at the time. But it just shows you how long the conversation has been. I suppose we've been trying to have the conversation, but it's never really kind of kicked off. And like I say, it's probably the last 5-10 years where people have been really engaged. I've been lucky enough in this group to travel the globe with it, and I suppose when I go to places like Colombia, where you see biodiversity and biodiversity management in action, and the interactions between nature and how you can actually have sustainable businesses, yet support the flora, the fauna, the Andean bear, the people, I think that connects right back through to the person. So it's with a wonderful sense of pride, I think, that I work in Smurfit Kappa, and everybody here does. But it's when we wake up every day, it's about how do we make this business more sustainable? How do we help our customers be more sustainable? And that's the drive. Everybody talks about economic profit, and those, they're really important because the simple reality is if you don't make a profit, you can't invest in everything else, and you won't have shareholders because there'll be no returns. So ultimately, while we mightn't like the idea of profit sometimes, it's a necessity to ensure that you can drive for everything you want in business. So, but I think it fundamentally comes down to, like you, I'm a consumer, and as my choices at the supermarket shelf, what drive me from a personal sustainability perspective, and then I try and link that back to what my customers might need on a broader scale from a business perspective.
I get that. That is already quite a passionate plea for sustainability. Of course, I like to hear that. But while Smurfit Kappa is a 10 billion euro company, and I think you have more than 50,000 employees, with what you're enlighten us a little bit.
I'll try. You're right. We're probably one of the world's biggest company that nobody's ever heard of sometimes, and you know, we're broadly number 50 in the FTSE 100. So you know, we are a very large organization even from a market cap perspective, and we operate in 36 countries, and like you say, almost 48,000, nearly 50,000 employees. And you know, some people mistake us. Smurfit Kappa sometimes gets broken down into, well, we're not the little blue fellas who live in history, and we're not the sportswear manufacturer either, or some kind of combination of the two. So we are Smurfit Kappa, and I suppose, you know, why would nobody really hear about us? I suppose we're predominantly B2C or B2B in that sense. So you know, but I can guarantee to you, if you're in a supermarket and you're picking a product off a shelf, or you're in a shop and you're looking at a display unit, or if you receive something to your house in corrugated packaging, or you've bought a television or a refrigerator or car parts, there's a fair chance that box is a Smurfit Kappa box. You know, we're the largest producer of corrugated packaging in Europe. We're the only pan-regional producer of corrugated packaging in Latin America, and we've been around since 1934. So we're one of the longest in the game. We started off as a very small box plant here in Rathmines, which is about 4 kilometers from where I sit now, to be built into, you know, quite simply a very impressive, very large Irish success story, among with many other Irish companies. We seem to be good at this, but you won't have heard of us, and that's okay. We're okay with that. We like kind of flying under the radar. But I think as a business model, Uwe, it's quite interesting, because when I joined back in the mid-90s, you know, corrugated packaging was seen as something that was used to get something valuable to somebody else. It was never seen as the product in itself. And I think the evolution through my time here is that we've kind of broken a lot of that B2B as a kind of philosophical thing to be more B2C. So in reality, when you pick up it's the consumer that will consume our product on shelf, shelf-ready packaging, or the outer container being the only box. So I've seen this kind of shift from transport medium, secondary packaging, for packaging to be the merchandising medium and the market medium. And that's really wonderful, because that leads you into a whole place of innovation. And indeed, it makes your ability to impact from a sustainability perspective much more real, because you're directly connecting with the consumer. So yeah, world's best kept secret in terms of our impact on sustainability, but we're okay with that.
Yeah, I get that, but let's dive a little bit deeper into the products that you provide, and let me understand a little bit. You know, where are they coming from? How do you produce them? What is the sustainability aspect?
I suppose the sustainability aspect is quite simple. It's a circular business, or we aim for it to be as circular as possible. So in a very simple, I suppose, way, we take 7 million tons of post-consumer waste, and we make beautiful boxes from it. And we'll see that box anywhere between 7 to 10 times in its life cycle. And because of the biodegradable nature of the product, we're certain that when that product goes back to nature, it goes back to nature leaving no impact. So you won't find our products on beaches, you won't find our products in seas, and if you do, they will have returned back to nature very quickly because the product is biodegradable. But what do? Like I say, we collect 7 million tons of post-consumer waste. So our product is broadly recycled. We do use some craft in our products, but we use those for certain products where you need strength and they're traveling long distances through supply chains. We are Europe's largest producer of craft liner, which is the grade that to keep it simple, comes directly from trees versus recycled boxes. But the reality is even a recycled box has some craft element in it because it needs strength. And as you recycle boxes, fibers get shorter, so they lose some of that strength. So our business model at its heart is to take waste and create product. And we run what we call is the integrated model. So we make all the paper that we need for the boxes we supply. And why is that important? It's very important from a security of supply perspective. And particularly in the last few years where supply chains were stretched and demand was so high, actually getting product to shelf became the challenge for a lot of our customers. And our ability to ensure that our product got to them and they got their product to their customers was very much business positive in that sense. So we collect the waste, we make the paper, and then that paper goes to a network of corrugated plants all around the group, making a multitude of products, I think it's fair to say. Anything from very large boxes that you would find in the automotive industry, for example, or the chemical industry, to we have a beautiful bag and box operation where you will find wine, for example, which was always the traditional product, but you get much more products like water in those now. We make a lot of on-shelf packaging, so when you walk to a shelf and you just take a product directly out of the box, that's shelf-ready packaging. So that removes the need for transport packaging and the decanted model of old, and the product becomes the marketing medium. We make point of display, so those pop-up things you see in supermarkets and around campaign time, Christmas, Easter, those kind of things. That's us. We do a lot of e-commerce. So a lot of boxes that you'll find coming through your front door, particularly in the last few years, would have been Smurfit Kappa boxes. Not necessarily the biggest and well-known brand, but we tend to partner with a lot of brands who work through that platform. And we like the idea of, if you like, the higher end of that business in terms of helping brand owners who may not have e-commerce model to build that out in a way that supports their brand identity and their brand reputation. And then we have a huge agricultural business. So agricultural trays, in field filling machines, things like that. So our business is, if it was to break it down, I'd say it's about 75% FMCG, and then the other 25% is kind of broadly split between industrial volumes of 5 to 6%, agricultural volumes 10 to 15%, and then you've got e-commerce discretely in there for the rest. But in reality, e-commerce pervades everything now. I mean, everybody has an e-commerce model. So, we have an internal debate sometimes with what e-commerce is, are DHL an e-commerce company now, or are they a delivery company? Mm-hmm. USPS, so we just say, look, e-commerce is everywhere. It's in all our volumes, but very distinct retailers we can identify. So I think it's fair to say that, if like I say, if you pick up a product on a shelf and you turn it upside down, you'll probably see our beautiful logo on the bottom of it. And all we ask is that when you've used it, you give it back to us and we can make more boxes with it.
Now you've raised a number of points here, but let me first, I'm coming from what you call the FMCG. So this is the fast-moving consumer goods companies, because some of our audience might not be familiar with some of the abbreviations. The other one, B2C and B2B. So you dealing with business partners rather than consumers, but you are more engaged with consumers now because you do shelf-ready packaging, which you mentioned. Shelf-ready packaging means that the original packaging is used on the shelf and there is no extra transport packaging. I think you've already explained that. And then the famous kraft liner, and I want to dive a little bit deeper there. So fundamentally, you get boxes back, and we'll talk about how you get boxes back in a second, but you get boxes back and you recycle them. And you said you can do this even 6-7 times. And that's impressive. But yes, you need for the strength some of the original material, and that means forests. So do you actually own forests? Is that where you get the original material from? And of course, as you know, and that's my second question, managing forests in a sustainable way is also a challenge. Can you say something on both of these things, please?
The only place we own forestry now is in Colombia. We did own forestry in Venezuela before we left that country, or our assets were taken from that country. I think it's probably more appropriate to say. So we do have forestry in Colombia, which we manage. And then in Europe, where we need trees, we have arrangements with local land or government agencies, as it would be in Sweden, to supply those trees. But you're right though, Uwe, because you can't, if you're going to be sustainable, and if your model is supposed to be sustainable, then it's got to be sustainable irrespective of where you touch that circularity piece. And when we talk about the trees that we take, in reality, packaging probably consumes less trees than agriculture or indeed furniture making or house building. So we tend to take, we tend to take some of the products that are not used for something else, and then we take those off to make paper with them. So, parts of the branches, some of the trunk, but the body of a tree generally would go towards, furniture, house building, construction, and equally sustainable ways of making those products. But, I think it does come back to how you manage those forests. And indeed, older trees consume less CO2 than younger trees. So there's always a need to kind of make sure that the forest is pruned and kept alive in that sense by creating space for newer, younger trees to grow, taking out some of the older trees that maybe aren't as efficient as they might be, and using those for kind of paper making and construction and everything else. But all our products, we aim to have either Forestry Steward Council certified, so FSC or PEFC as the other acronym might be. We work with the WWF in Colombia, for example, where we do have forests, and they've certified our forests as FSC. So where we do consume products like that, we always drive to make sure that the certifications are there to make sure we are doing it in a sustainable way. And that's very important for our customers too. Our customers want to make sure that the product they're getting from us is delivered in the most sustainable way possible. And we can only do that by certifying forestry as being sustainable. And we can only do that by doing the same actually on the recycle side in terms of where it comes through. But we always do, and it's a very kind of delicate debate, and I can understand for people why, when they see images of forestry being deforested in that sense, that they kind of naturally assume that this is a terrible thing, and it is when it's done incorrectly. But if you've been around as long as we have, and indeed some of our peer groups who are equally big consumers of forestry, it's important to get past that kind of the visual imagery sometimes what people want you to see towards what's actually happening on the ground. And actually Europe would have planted more trees over the last number of years than they would have consumed. And largely because, it's a carbon sink kind of industry. So we do need those trees to help the overall kind of climate pattern, but also we do need those to kind of grow and take the place of older trees that are not needed anymore. In Latin America, those growth patterns happen really, really quickly. So from a small seedling to a tree happens much, much quicker than Europe. So you get better turns on a forest there using pine and eucalyptus and those kind of brands. But I think it's fair to say that, and I probably speak for my peer group here in the sense that when we look at how we approach forestry, and we wouldn't be the biggest consumer in that sense, or the biggest owner of forests, I think we all have the same mindset, which is, as organizations, we are at our heart foresters, paper makers, box makers, and so sustainable practices run through us. And I think it's about, like all these things, it's about us educating the population on what actually happens in forests, and not sometimes to believe some of the worst aspects of deforestation, where we see forests being taken out to create room for agriculture, for example, where maybe that could be done slightly differently. So I think it's while we might take trees out, we always replace them, I think is the fundamental point. Whereas that doesn't necessarily happen in other industries, which is where I think the bulk of that problem might lie.
I have to say, from my own experience, and I've been purchasing boxes, I'm afraid to say, not only from you, but also from other suppliers, it's dreadful. I know you're shaking your head. I understand. But one of my biggest challenges was Indonesia at the time, where certain companies had definitely not a sustainable way of running forestry. And I saw two issues there. One was biodiversity, because they were really devastating effects. And the other one was also the effect on the indigenous population there, taking away their livelihood. Do you have any views on that?
On Indonesia, not specifically, because we've never operated out there, but I think where we do operate, we tend to work with the local communities. So particularly in Colombia, where we would have a lot of farms, we tend to work with those communities to make sure that we're respectful of their traditions. A lot would work with us. We don't tend to get into displaced lands or displaced peoples. That's not our place to be. Issues do arise from time to time, but we deal with those in a kind of very upfront kind of way. I suppose, it sort of goes back to, again, the heart of Smurfit Kappa. When you think about how the paper making industry has grown up over the last century and a half, most paper mills started probably in the middle of a town, and then the town grew around it. You see that a lot through the Benelux, particularly in the Netherlands, and through Germany, where you get that. And in Latin America, similarly, you have a different economic environment there, where, somebody like us coming in and creating businesses creates a lot of opportunity for people to have a lot of employment through generations. And we see a lot of generational people coming into our company, in the sense that the father, the son, the mother, the daughter, the sister will all work with us. And that's a responsibility too. So we take our place in community very, very seriously. And Tony particularly would have a maxim that says that when you get to the end of your career in Smurfit Kappa, you need to be able to look back and say, I did some good. And the reality is, I don't think any of us would feel good about ourselves in Smurfit Kappa if we look back and said it was fine, but that particular community were just a pain for the last 50 years, and that's not what we do. So I know our guys in Colombia, and there's a lot of indigenous people, because that's where we'd really see it. But we spend a lot of time with the leaders of those communities, making sure that everything is okay, and making sure that we are respectful. And we would give over lands to what they need, and we would take lands what we need. And we work very hard with, say, cocoa growers in terms of what we do. But we have a keen sense of biodiversity equally, because it always strikes me sometimes that the conversations around climate get driven down the carbon route always. But actually, I think we need to start having a very serious conversation about biodiversity loss, because it's as important to me. The simple reality is, you can reduce carbon all you want, but if all of a sudden we find we've no water, that's a much bigger issue. So, but to your point, we've worked hard. That doesn't mean we haven't had problems over the years, and we haven't had to deal with those. But I think what we try and do is ensure that we respect the rights of the lands of the people where we operate. And generally, I think it's fair to say we'd be seen as a good employer in just about every country we're in, in fact, all the countries we're in. But that's really down to the hard work of the local teams and ensuring that their connections with the communities are strong. And that concept of giving back as an organization, and if you like, building the village around us is as important as making the product in it.
Now, I'm very glad that you have that view, because I agree with you. We can't have a real reduction of carbon without thinking about biodiversity and vice versa. So this is very important. We started off by you explaining how circular you are, and that's very impressive. What we didn't touch on so far is, where do you get actually all these boxes from, that you have that high percentage of recycled material?
Based on what's coming through my door for the last 2 years, I think most of it comes from my house, Uwe, which is by what my sons have bought. I suppose we get it from everywhere, is probably the broadest answer, but to kind of break that down. So if you go to, so we would collect at the back of very large supermarkets. So take someone like Walmart in Mexico, which is 180, 200 stores, we would collect at the back of that. And the same in North America, where we'd operate. We would have arrangements with, city councils in the UK or the land in Germany, companies like Veolia, where we would arrange to take, they would sort the waste and we would take it from them. We have our own collection facilities. So we have a number of our own recycling plants or reclamation facilities where we would bring product in and sort it. And we would have people who would, in some of our other countries, we would bring stuff directly to the gate where we would take it. And like that equally, for domestic waste and that kind of post-consumer waste, the local authorities would sort and collect it through those recycling bins, and we would get some of it back there. And also, actually, about 25% of our material comes from ourselves. So, when you make a corrugated box and you run it across a machine and it cuts out the little clippings to make the box, all those clippings come back to us too. And equally in those plants, we would have a recycling system where any of that product come back. So it comes from everywhere. I think the issue we have is that, big supermarkets is a very efficient system for collection. domestic environments are not. And it sort of comes back to almost full circle back to what we talked about at the start, which is, what can we do as individuals to help that particular problem? And what I'd say is, the more you can recycle properly and get back to us, the better chance we have of making that circular model even stronger. So, it's when you put in Ireland, we have a green bin for recycled materials. It's making sure that it's clean material. It's not contaminated with, other things you put on top of it or commingled. So the cleaner we get it back, the better. But we have multiple sources depending on the region and the place we're in. The biggest issue though in the last few years, I think, is around that pure drive towards e-commerce, particularly during 2020, 21 and COVID-19, and our ability to get that domestic consumption of e-commerce material back has been a challenge. I think it's fair to say.
I understand. You will be pleased to hear that I have an extra bin just for paper. So that's collected separately and probably ends up in one of your plants. Just a quick question on that one. That is, of course, an energy-intensive process to make that into nice new corrugated. How do you deal with that element of your sustainability?
I suppose when we think about our footprint in terms of CO2, if you like, and intensity, really sits in the paper mills. The box plants by themselves are relatively lower intensity from a CO2 perspective. They would consume electricity and they clearly fossil based, but as a big intense production, it's the paper mills. And I suppose, how do we do it? It's investment. It's investment in cleaner tech. It's investment in newer boilers. It's the removal of fossil towards biomass and those kind of things. So a couple of years ago, we put a new boiler into our kraftliner mill in Nettingstorfer. The boiler, slightly bigger than the one you get in your house, about 134 million. And that has taken 40,000 tons of CO2 out of our system. We're going to do a similar project in our Cali mill, about $100 million worth. And that will take about 140,000 tons of CO2 out of our system. Our paper mill in Zülpich has a couple of investments where it will probably be the first carbon neutral mill in our group. So it's constant investment, to be honest with you. And I suppose it's linked, maybe to some conversation we may have in a while about targets and how we set targets, and then we have an investment roadmap to meet them. But really, when we talk about our product, that carbon intensity happens in the paper mills, and how do we reduce that? You can only do that by investing in newer, cleaner tech and more efficient and bigger boilers to do things like burn biomass or multi-fuel rather than fossil.
Ken, I really enjoy talking to you, but unfortunately, I look at the clock and time is running out. Let me please compliment you because you are CFO. I have to mention that again. You are the Chief Financial Officer, and I think your passion for sustainability and your knowledge around the issues, some so-called experts on sustainability can still learn a little bit from. So far, for that prejudice that CFOs are not interested in sustainability, you've really destroyed that one today, and I appreciate that. You already mentioned we should talk a little bit about the targets and some of the solutions that you have come up with. We'll do this the next time round, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Uwe, for taking the time.
And for our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series, or even explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcast. Thank you for listening, and please join us again in 2 weeks' time. For then, goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.